Okay, so greetings everyone. Today our lesson is on time value of money. And when it comes to time value of money, it's a critical construct that has been used and continues to be used quite significantly in the world of finance. Whenever we talk of the concept of time value of money, it is because we want to recognize the fact that money received today, even if it has the same nominal value, has a very different intrinsic value from money received tomorrow. And for that matter, in making decisions that involve money, which is a very scarce resource to start with, you may want to take account of the implications of time value of money. So in terms of the topic, we're going to try to understand, one, what it means by constructing the cash flow timelines and how to help you in your analysis of time value of money problems, and also learn some of the techniques we can use in solving time value of money problems. Also to look at compounding and in relation to future value of cash flows, and also the issue of present values and etc. So that's for discounting, and also how interest rates work within the space of finance. So now let's start by looking at the concept. So if, for example, I had the option, or you had the option of taking money from me, 1,000 cedis today, I'm feeling very good, and I decide to give you 1,000 cedis today, versus 1,000 cedis exactly 1 year from today, 8th November 2024, I believe that your most likely inclination will be to take the money now in terms of today versus taking it 8th November 2024. And the reason you normally would want to do that is because if you were to take 1,000 cedis from me today, for example, you could invest that money. And if for nothing at all, you could actually get a T-bill rate, which maybe for now will be approximating 28, 29%. And so by the time the year is over on 8th November 2024, you could actually have your initial 1,000 cedis plus 28% or 29% of that 1,000, which means somewhere around another 290 cedis. That means your total value on hand by taking the offer up today could be somewhere in the region of 1,290, compared to the person who decided to wait and then take the 1,000 cedis on the same day, 8th November 2024. They get 1,000 cedis, while you who took the money today and invested, hopefully, you're going to make, even at T-bill rate, you could make 1,290 cedis. So clearly, the timing of the disbursements make a difference, if for nothing at all, in what the various amounts of money can buy. The one who took the 1,000 today could actually end up buying something better with 1,290 compared to the one who is taking the 1,000 in raw form on the 8th day of November 2024. So clearly that brings into sharp focus the concept of the time value of money, meaning that if you take a cedi or a dollar today, and let's work within the Ghana cedi specifically, it can actually do more for you than a cedi received 1 year from today. And so when it comes to that, it means that whenever you're taking decisions in terms of making some kind of payments today in anticipation of money to be received sometime in the future, then of course you have come face to face with the concept of what time value of money. And so that's where we begin to put the principles into use. Now, at this point, let me proceed to show something that would put it in perspective for you. And that has to do with the fact that when we have the concept of time value of money, so now let's start. I hope you can see the white screen. And then we proceed to this point and say that, okay, let's start by saying, for example, that we have 1,000 cedis today. And so if I were to use a timeline, it means that if I were to draw a timeline like this, today, just like any stop clock, is 0. And so a minute from now will be 1 minute from now. A week from now will be 1 week from now. A year from now will be 1 year from now. So usually on the timeline, we'll recognize right now, today, as 0, and subsequent periods as the case may be. We can have different intervals. It could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be quarterly, it could be annual, it could be semi-annual. It's all up to us as to what we are faced with. And so assuming this is on an annual basis, it means that when I say 1, it means a year from today. When I place on 2, it is 2 years from today. When I place on 3, it is 3 years from today, 4, and then 5. So here, this is 1 year from today, 2 years from today, 3 years from today, 4 years from today, and then 5 years from today. Now, if I were to be given 1,000 cedis today, or you were to be given 1,000 cedis today, right now, it means that you could actually have your 1,000 cedis. And if you invested it and you want to know how much you have at the end of 1 year, it means you're going to have your 1,000 cedis coming back to you, plus interest that you will accrue, which will be calculated. And if you're looking at 1 year, means multiplied by R. And so that gives us our future amount, or in this case, we can call it our future value. Now, if that is the case, we can then begin to simplify the construct and say that, okay, future value after 1 year of investing is actually equal to the principal amount, or what we sometimes refer to as the present value, plus the interest that we're going to make on it. And this interest is calculated by the present value multiplied by the rate of interest that is applicable. Now, if this is the case, then we can get to the next point of simplifying and say the future value after 1 year, given a certain interest rate, can easily be simplified as PV1 plus R. And so then, if I have 1,000 cedis, and then I'm going to use that to derive my future value given a certain interest rate, then I'm going to get to the point of being able to compute the future value. What this also then means is that I can go a step further and say, okay, what if instead of recouping my money as we normally may want to do, I'd rather want to roll over everything for another year. So it means that if I were to come here, it means that I'll have my future value 1 on this. If I want to roll it again into the next year, it means I'll say future value after 2 years of investing my current money, which is typically referred to as the present value. Now, take a step further, then it means that if that is the case, then I am going to be investing my future value 2 can then be said as my future value 1 being invested for 1 period. In this case, what I'm trying to do here is that remember that it's literally me saying that, take for example, future value 1 plus future value 1 at the going interest rate. So future value 1R. Now, if that is the case, then it means I have FV1 plus FV1R. Now, if I simplify, then I'm going to have FV1 into 1 plus R, which is what we have here. So taking it a step further, it means that FV2, which is given as FV1 into 1 plus R from the simplification that we took in there, I can replace FV1 here, or I can substitute that with this. And so FV1 can be replaced by that. And so what in the place of FV1, I can put this here. So it means that my FV2 can actually be PV1 plus R. Then I account for the second one, which is also then 1 plus R. So that when I want to simplify that, I can say that future value of any amount invested for 2 periods is the amount into 1 plus R. And since we're dealing with indices here, similar base, so that means to the power what? 2. It means by extension, if I'm going to be investing for 5 periods, then it's going to be FV5. If I made a payment, I'm getting the money today, will be PV1 plus R to the power of 5, because it was invested for 5 seasons. Now, this is a lump sum one time. And so what really then it means is that we can have n number of seasons or n number of periods, meaning that FVN is equal to PV1 plus R to the power n. And this becomes the standard formula we have for determining the future value of a single or lump sum one-time payment that is being rolled consistently. Now, the construct here is known as the compounding factor, because if you look at it, that's what adds on and adds on. Now, let me show you something. So far, when we started with future value at time 1 being given as PV1 plus R, because we're investing for just 1 period, we got our principal back and then interest for 1 period. Now, if for some reason we decided not to reinvest, it meant that what would really happen is that every year we would just have the principal times the rate and then times the time, because there's no effect of compounding. But if you look at it closely, what you find out, if we were to try, let's say FV2, what we had was actually FV1, and then we had it 1 plus R. Now, when we expanded that, we ended up with FV2, therefore being what? Literally, it's, if you look at it closely, there's actually FV plus FV1R. This, as we have here, even this FV, remember, it's actually earning interest. So this is earning interest, but it's earning interest on previously earned interest that came from the PV1 plus R. So embedded in this FV after 1 year is interest that were accrued from the investment that we did. And then that interest that was added back to the principal to give us the new principal for the next investment horizon also is earning interest. So when we earn interest on interest, we typically refer to that as compound interest. And so simple interest is the case where we actually just earn interest on the principal. So every time you invest and you take out the accrued interest and only earn interest on the principal, we say you are earning simple interest. When you add the interest earned to the original principal to get a new amount, which is now inclusive of the original principal and the accrued interest, which together now earns interest, so that your principal earns interest and your interest from previous season earns interest. That interest from previous season earning further interest, we say that is compound interest. And that actually is one of the core principles that makes the difference in some of the financial decisions that we will take. And so sometimes what you realize happening is that if, for example, we were to work on the premise of I have 100,000 cedis and I'm even making 10%. 10% means that at the end of each year, if I were actually dealing with just my principal, it means that at the end of each year, I would have 10% more. So period 1, I would actually have 110,000. That means 10,000 extra plus my principal. Now, if I were to take the 10,000 off, and for that matter, I'm only still back to my 100,000. What it means is that in the next season, I am going to earn another 10,000 on the 100,000 because I'm going to make 10%. And that means that for each of the 5 periods, I would only be earning 10,000. And so 10,000, so that's where you get the principal times the rate times the time. And that gives you my simple interest. So in this case, I have 10,000 multiplied by what? 5 years of investment. And that means I make 50,000. Now, let's compare the scenario where someone decides that they will not take their money out. And so if they decide that they are not going to take their money out, what really happens is that they invest 100,000 for 1 year, and that gives them 110,000. And then they decide that they're going to roll over that 110,000 for another period, earning 10% still. So here they do not take out their the interest they accrued in the first season. And so once they do a 10% on that, it takes them to 121,000, which means if you can look at it closely, instead of making a 10,000 between 110 and 121, they've actually now made 11,000, which tells you the differential here, because first they are earning 10% on the original 100,000, which gives them 10,000, and then they are earning 10% interest on the 10,000 they accrued, which is the extra 1,000, which takes them to 11,000. Now, if they decide that they will not take the money out and then they roll over everything and earn another 10%, what would happen is that they are going to have their money getting to 133,100, and then they're going to roll it over once more for 1 extra period. That takes them to the space of 146,410. And if they do for the 5th year, by rolling the 146,410 with the same 10% that is being accrued, they are going to be walking away with 161,051. So then what it means for us now is, you can see the difference. For the one who went through the simple interest, their total value at the end of the period will be 150,000. And once you take out the initial 100,000, they are left with just 50,000. Meanwhile, for this person here, if we minus the 100,000, if we take out the 100,000 from the 161, it's clear that we have approximately 61,051 cedis. Clearly a vast difference, so an extra 11,051. And so what really then is the case, you can see that in 5 years, instead of walking away with just 50,000, the compound interest allows you rather to walk away with 61,051 in just 5 years. So you can imagine if this compounding effect goes on to, Prince, I think you can type it in the chat box. I'll read it out and fix that. So if you have so that gives us approximately 61,000. So one simple way, instead of going through the whole iteration I did, if I had 100,000 to be invested at 10% for 5 years, or this is all I will do, and I'll fix that into my calculator. So 100,000 into 1.1 to the power 5, and immediately I have my 161,000, and then I take it from there. Okay, Prince, yes. Okay. At the same rate for 5 years, what if the rate is not the same? In which case, then you are going in batches. And remember, then it also would be the case that the impact would also be felt by whoever. Yeah, so we have, and so the example I did, I went through one by one, which then allows you to adjust for the differential rates. But normally when we are doing investments, sometimes we make assumptions and look for an approximate rate we can use over time. But in reality, yes, it does happen that the rates may not be the same. So like I use the 10%, instead of having 10% consistently, it can actually vary depending on what it is you got yourself into. But if we are working on the assumption that the rate stays unchanged, then you can clearly see the differential between the simple interest and the compound interest. So that's holding all else equal. So that's the typical framework. So here we can easily say future value of 100,000 after 5 years is giving us 100,000 into 1 plus the rate for the 5 years, and we know whatever rate. If the rate happens to be in a different format and changing over time, then instead of using the indices frame that we use because of the should I say identical nature of the returns, then it means we're going to have something looking like this: 100,000 into, remember how we came by the formula, so we'll have 1 plus R1, but because they are not identical over time, we're going to have 1 plus R2, because it means year 2 rate is different, 1 plus R3, and it goes on and on. But under this framework for time value of money, and which you can modify as we go, we make assumptions for the base case, and then we proceed to making adjustments as we go on. And so that's for the question in terms of how we come by future value. So then we are faced with the standard formula which says future value of an investment for n periods of investment season is given by the present value 1 plus the rates that we are earning. That's so approximately the average rate over each of those years to the power n. And n here can be 10, 20,000, whatever. And of course, we'll come back to look at some differentials that will emerge. Now, so that's for the future value formula. So then it stands to reason, therefore, for example, that we can play around with this very construct we have derived. We can change subject and derive any of the parameters out of that. So for example, you're going into an investment. Somebody requires you to make a payment today, that's present value, and promising you some future amount, that is future value. If this is the formula for future, meaning that the future value is a function of the present value and the rates that you are earning on that particular investment, then it only makes sense that you could do a change of subject to determine what exactly is the future amount that is being offered worth. And that is what brings us into the realm of compounding. So here we're on the same timeline. You are here today, and then somebody is promising you a certain amount of money, let's say 1 year from today. Nobody really knows what tomorrow holds. So they're asking you to make a certain payment, which is typically the PV, in anticipation of the future amount. In standard principle, what you really want to do is to ask yourself, looking around at similar investments and the kind of return that those kinds of risk profiles give to the investment community, is this offer worth it? And of course, that means that now you need to find out if we are saying that the future value of a future value is dependent on the present value, compounded by a rate and for a period of time, then it means that we can actually start and say that this PV here, the payment you made, and this relationship. So we'll come back and put FV1, which we know, which is being promised, is equal to PV1 plus R, and in this case to the power 1. So it's actually something we can ignore for now, but let's say we put it there. So in this case, we know we have a sense of what we are being offered. We have checked the market and we have a sense of the rate of interest that we should be earning for that kind of risk profile of a project. What we are not sure of is how much money is worth it to balance this relationship. So then we then decide to do a change of subject to say that if FV is equal to PV1 plus R, then it only makes sense to say that FV1 over 1 plus R is equal to PV. So that rewritten just to make the PVB on the left-hand side means that we have PV is equal to FV, in this case, 1 year investment, divided by 1 plus the rate, and in this case, to the power 1. So then we can adjust and say PV is equal to 1 time future value divided by 1 plus R to the power n, because remember, we are coming from the principle that FV is equal to FVN is equal to PV 1 plus R to the power n. So here we just made a change of subject. And so this is literally trying to replicate what the timeline is telling us. So if we are to apply and say that n is equal to 5, for example, it means that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So then somebody is promising us, for example, a certain amount of money in year 5. But we are here today, so we must make a decision about this expected future amount based on what we think is on the ground. What I have just put in terms of the formula work is actually you rolling the money back, and that rolling back is what we call discounting. So look at it, you can see how many loops I did to get from when the money is supposed to be paid to when I want to do my evaluation. And so if you look at it critically, what you realize is that I'm rolling back 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm rolling back 5 periods or 5 loops from period 5 into today to be able to arrive at the present value. And so if somebody were to offer me 20,000 5 years from today, so I have 20,000 5 years from today, and then I check the market and I get to know that, okay, the market rate is around 18% per annum. My next question is, what are they asking me to give? Or in this case, what should I invest today to justify the 20,000 being promised in the future? And that is where you are able to make an appropriate decision. Because, for example, if we put it in the formula, therefore, and say that PV is equal to FV over 1 plus R to the power, in this case, 5, what we're going to do is to take our 20,000, which we know or have been promised for the future, the rate that we got by asking around or doing our own due diligence, and then for a 5-year window. Now, if we fix on that, what it means is that we're going to have our 20,000 divided by our 1.18 to the power 5, and that gives us approximately 2.2878. And so if we decide, therefore, that we're going to divide our 20,000 by 2.2878, that tells us that if we can actually guarantee earning approximately 18% on our investment for a clear 5 years, the largest possible amount we should ever invest based on this is 8,742.0229, meaning that if the person is asking us to put up this and earn 20,000 and we confirm on the market that the rate is 18, then we can. If they ask us to even put up less, what it means is that they have to be earning more interest to be able to arrive at 20,000 in 5 years. But if they ask us to put up more, for example, give me 10,000 today and I'll give you 20,000 5 years from today. If you check the market and it turns out that interest is 18, then what you want to do is to say, okay, 10,000 into 18% for 5 years should give us something in the region of 22,800, and so that's that. So when you do that, you're going to have your 22,877. So it means that if you were to invest 10,000 cedis at a place earning 18% for 5 years, your ultimate value will be 22,877.5776, meaning that if the person is offering you 20% 5 years from today and asking you to put up 10,000 for it, what really it means is that you're not getting 18%, you're getting something less. And so that's how you are able to determine whether or not an offer on the table is worth it or not. It means by principle, if the person says, put up 10,000, so here we can decide that if this is the future value formula, is equal to PV 1 plus R to the power N. If somebody were to offer you 20,000 N periods from today and is asking you to put up 10,000 and it says for 5 years, it means that all things being equal, you should be able to solve for this missing one. And so to solve for that, of course, you're going to start by dropping or releasing elements around it. So it means that we're going to end up with, let's say, 20,000 divided by 10,000 is equal to 1 plus R to the power what? 5. Now, clearly, this takes us to the next level where we have 2 is equal to 1 plus R to the power 5. It means a certain interest rate compounded for 5 years results in the doubling of the initial principal. So what we need to find out, what rate is giving us the doubling, or what this function. So here, what we do the next is to try to release that. So of course, we'll take the nth root here. So in this case, that's one of the easiest we could do. And so when we do that, we're going to have 2 into 1 over 5 is equal to 1 plus R. So then we move a step further and we have our 2. 1 over 5 literally is to the power, so that should be 0.2 thereabout, minus 1 because we're looking for R, and that gives us R. And so if we have, for example, therefore 2 to the power 0.2, because 0.2, 1 over 5 is 0.2, that tells us that we have something in the region of 1.1486. And so minus 1 is equal to R. That means that once we take it out, we actually have 0.1486 is equal to R, which tells us that the rate for somebody who is offering us 20%, 20,000 in exchange for 10,000 today. So they're asking you to give up 10,000 cedis today and receive 20,000 5 years from today. What they're really offering you is 14.686%, sorry. And so we have that. So we have 14.686 14.86%. And then, oh, okay, sorry, let me just 14.86%. So that's what you now compare, and you ask yourself if this rate is fine. And so this is a principle where sometimes you actually do deploy them when you're also looking for a certain amount of money. So for example, let's say that I want to take a holiday, maybe some 5-6 years from today. Let's just say for a moment we hold prices constant. So I know that I will need at least 50,000 5 years from today to be able to undertake my trip. So it means that my target amount is 50,000 5 years from today. So it means today is now. So we have 1, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4, and then we have 5. Now I should be able to deploy this construct in making some sound decisions. For example, if I scout around and the interest rate on the market is 15%, for example, nothing more, nothing less, so an average of 15% for the 5-year period I have till I want to undertake my vacation, then I can actually ask myself, what's the minimum amount of money I should have right here, invested for a period of 5 years, earning 15%. So here, each loop gives me 15%. And by the time I hit year 5, I should have 50,000 to walk home with. If that is the case, then I can easily put in and say, okay, so my future value in 5 years is known. So I put in first the formula works to say FV is equal to PV 1 plus R, in this case, to the power of 5, because I'll be investing for 5 years. I already know what I'm looking for in my future amounts, which is 50,000. I don't know how much I should put up today, but I know what interest rate I am likely to be getting for the next 5 years. And so then I'm going to proceed to start solving. And then it means that I'm going to just do 50,000 divided by 1.15 to the power 5. And that should tell me, for example, what I should be getting from now. And so that should be giving me somewhere in the range. So I'm going to do 50,000 divided by 2.0114. And if you watch, I keep on consistently working with 4 decimal places. It minimizes the incidence of errors as you move on. If you're working in Excel, normally you would just work with a full chain, but of course in exam you have to cut off some, and the preference usually is for 4 decimal places. So if we have 50,000 being taken care of, and then what we then have then is 50,000 divided by 2.0114. It means that if I were to put away 24,858 cedis and some 31 pesos, or so in this case 3076, or in this case 77. It means that, and you can see from the compounding factor, it means that I'll get just above 2 times my initial investment. So of course 2 times of this would have been as 48, then plus the extra coins we have on this. So what it means is that if I am to realize my dream of taking that vacation, costing 50,000 cedis 5 years from today, and being assured of a rate of return of nothing short of 15% for the 5-year period, it means that if I put up 24,000 cedis today, I could go and sleep, and then 5 years from today, in an account earning 15% for 5 years, I could walk away with a clean 50,000. And that is actually a principle that we sometimes use. In fact, we use, not observe, but most people who get serious about their retirement planning, for example, will say that, okay, if I need 1 million cedis to retire 20 years from now, for example, how much do I need to work at to be able to accrue 1 million in my account? Because I'm believing that maybe if I have 1 million and I've invested in, all things being equal, safe government bonds, and they're going to be giving me 20% per annum, what it means that when I retire with my 1 million in bonds, I could be walking away with 200,000 every year. If I divide it by 12, that means at least I'm going to get something in the region of some 16 to 17,000 CDs per month to spend. Oh, that's not bad. And so my question is, if I have 20 years to be able to accumulate 1 million, then what do I do? Okay, if the rate of return is 15%, then I'm going to have the case and say 1 million, in this case, divided by 1.15 for 20 years. So if I do that, then it means that I'm going to look at 1.15 for 20 years. And that takes us, it means that in the 20 years at this rate, we'll need about 1/16 of the money. So let's look at it. So this is what we're going to get. 1 million divided by 16.3665. So if we do 1 million divided by 16.3665, it means that if we were to put up 61,000 CDs today, 61,100 Ghana cedis today, and we go and sleep, and we are sure of earning 15% for the next 20 years on average, what it means is that by the time we are retiring in 20 years, we would have our 1 million sitting in our bank account. And if all things being equal, barring any other kind of inflationary pressure, if that is supposed to assure us with a good pension, that is what the case is. And so that is how you can sometimes use this concept to arrive at decision points that would help you to make. Now, there are times when you have an amount you need. Because you do not determine interest rates are given. And then you also constrain with the amount of money you have. The question is, if you have a target amount to raise, you cannot do much about the interest rate on the market, meaning that you can't go shopping around for interest rates, you are locked. And you can't also do much about your initial investment because that's all you can actually afford. Then based on the target that you have, how long do you need to wait? And of course, using the same construct, it means that if we are saying that FV is equal to PV1 plus R to the power N, then it means that if we are looking for N, then what do? We start simplifying. And so FV over PV is equal to 1 plus R to the power N. Remember, this is the unknown function or factor now. And so what do we try to do? Usually when we are looking for this exponent, then it means we're going to take logs. And so it means that we're going to have the log of that would be equal to that. And then we solve it. Once by solving this, we are able to get to our N, meaning how long we need to wait. So these are things you could practice to say, for example, yes, I want to take a trip to Hawaii. But when I look around the markets, the cheap, highest interest rate I could get, almost assured, maybe it's somewhere in the region of 15–16% with maybe some of the banks. And maybe I want to lock it in. Question is, all the money I have on me is 20,000, but I need as much as maybe 100,000 to be able to take that trip and feel good about myself. So question is, if I can lock in this 15–16%, how long do I have to wait for my 20,000, earning 16%? to give birth or to morph into 100,000. And this, and taking your logs, would actually take you to the value to tell you how long it is you'd have to wait. And of course, in that regard, depending on whether the time is too long for you, then you may want to take decisions as to, can you shop around for a new interest rate? Possibly. Or can you do something about your initial investment so that you can get to your target faster? So that's for the basics. So it means that at this point, we've managed to look at one, how to utilize the future value formula and then arrive at values somewhere into the future, and then rework that same formula to give us present value, meaning that if somebody promises you money sometime in the future, you can discount it. So you see, when we are dividing here with this discounting, to be able to give us the present value of an anticipated future value. And then, of course, we can solve for the R, and we can solve for the N, and then we move on. And so that's where we have assumed that it is a one-time payment, let's say here. And then we are interested in doing the evaluation here. But what happens, for example, we all know that we don't just do one-time investment. So if you're looking at a concept, for example, looking at the fact that you have decided that whenever you are paid your salary or your bonus, so let's work with the annual framework for now. Whenever you are paid your annual bonus or performance, whatever, or clothing allowance, or whatever it is they like to call it, 13th month salary, you are putting away a certain proportion. Now, because you don't determine the amount of money that you'll be paid, it means that the proportion can vary. So let's look at, and of course, it stands to reason that more often than not, you would have the case of payment happening in arrears. And so here, in fact, that brings me to an issue that I think I needed to. So here, if instead of the money being received today, you know that your first year's bonus will be received at the end of period 1, and that is where you were receiving your 10,000 or 20,000. If you still want to do something in year 5, then you have to now learn how to count. Okay, then just I didn't scale well, but you could take it. So if my first payment, instead of being received here, is rather received here, it means that if I'm still interested in 0.5, now my moves are no longer 5, but rather 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. What it means is that if the information says, for example, that payment starts a year from today, and you want to know the future value in year 5, it means you only have 4 loops as opposed to the original example we started with 5 loops. So in this case, your payment or PV will be 1 plus R into bracket 4 because you only did 4 loops. If the payment was made right now, then it means you have what? 5 loops. So always be mindful of 1, when the payment was made, and 2, when you are hoping to do the evaluation. So if payment was made at the end of 0.1, and then your point of evaluation is 0.5, it means you only have 4 annual investment windows. If payment is made right now, and you're looking at end of year 5, then it means you have 5 investment horizons to cross. And so be mindful of that whenever you're selecting. So at any point in time, the first question you want to ask is when the payments are occurring and when the evaluations are also expected to occur, and that will determine how you loop up and whatnot. So here, let's move on and say, for example, like I said, you have decided that at the end of every year, when they pay you, so it means that when they pay you your annual bonus, you're going to take some and then invest at a certain rate. But because you're not the one who determines the rate that you will receive or the amount that you'll be receiving, you have decided that you invest in 20%. But your first 20%, whatever amount of money you were given, the first 20%, for example, amounts to 100,000. 10,000. The following year, the same 20%, but maybe you got a bigger bonus. So it amounted to 15,000. But then in the third year, so this is end of year 1, end of period 2, end of period 3. In the third year, things were not so great for the company. Maybe your performance also wasn't the best. The environment wasn't great. So 20% of whatever you were given amounts to, let's say, another 10,000. So it didn't increase. And in year 4, you did the same 20%, but it amounted to 12,000. Then in year 5, you got your 20%, but that one, luckily for you, amounted to 20,000. So then the question is, how do we do this kind of computation? Having learned the construct clearly, you can decide to pick them, and that's actually the way to go, especially when they are not even, is to go one by one and say, for example, okay, let's take payment 1. If we want to know how much we'll have in our accounts at the end of the 5th year, then we need to find out how many windows does payment 1 get to enjoy in the account earning interest. Is going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. So payment 1 is going to be 10,000 into 1 plus R to the power 4. Then payment 2 would only get 3 loops. So that becomes 15,000 into 1 plus whatever the rate is to the power of 3, because it only gets 3 investment loops. Payment 3 is another 10,000, but gets invested for only 2 years. You can see 2 loops, so 1 plus R to the power of 2. And then we have payment 4, 12,000 into 1 plus R to the power, it only gets invested once. Then you can see that payment 5 actually does not get invested. So even if you were to put the formula, you put it to the power 0, because it was paid on the day that we're doing the evaluation. So it doesn't get to be invested for the relevant investment period. So what it means is that to be able to arrive at the account balance, we are just going to do a summation for the respective ones. And so what you end up doing to say that when you have payments that are irregular in amounts, but for multiple periods, then the easiest is to now put, so it means if you look at it closely, we have first payment, PV, 1 plus R, plus second payment, another PV in period 2, and so it goes on and on and on. So what do you do if you're adding them and it goes on and on to the last payment? Then we can say that it is actually a summation of the individual present values, accounting for their respective interest rates. So I is equal to 1 to n. And so this becomes typically a summation of the formula works. But clearly what it's just showing you is that pick the first payment, work it out. Pick the second payment, work it out, and all of them, and add them up. And that gives you your total future value of multiple payments that are not identical in form. So that happens to be when we are doing future value. So then it makes sense that if somebody were to give you offers, so somebody says, you know something, I have this investment idea. If you put up some money today, for example, this is what I'm promising you, that in year 1, I'll give you 10,000. In year 2, I'll give you, let's say, 15,000. In year 3, I'll give you another 10,000. In year 4, I'll give you 12,000. And then in year 5, I'll give you 20,000. Now your dilemma is, how do you take a decision based on these amounts that have been offered? and then you check the market, and for the kind of risk profile that this person or business falls in, maybe the rate is a certain amount. All you need to do is to come and say, okay, if I had individual amounts, I would have taken my first FV and discounted 1 plus R to the power 1, because from 1 to 0 is 1 step. Then I have my second payment. It's FV, so FV2, how many steps do I need to move from 2 to 0.0, which is the present? I move 2 steps. So it means that I'm going to have 1 plus R to the power 2. Then I'm going to move FV3, 1 plus R to the power 3, plus FV4 over 1 plus R to the power 4. And then it goes on FV5 over 1 plus R to the power 5. So you can see that all we are doing here literally is to apply. Now we're just putting building blocks together. If you had only one, you would have said FVN divided by 1 plus R to the power n, and that's that. So whether it's one period only, but now you have multiple. So once you add them up, it means that when you want to determine the total amount in an account, or what we call the present value of accumulative sums of payments that are not identical, then what you're really doing is just summing up the present value of the individual. So if you want the summed present value, is actually the individual future values discounted. So here we have, discounted for the respective period. So it means you're going to pick item 1, discounted, pick item 2, pick item 3, item 4, item 5. And so that's how you can deal with the multiple streams of payment that have irregular amounts. So here we either can compound multiple streams of payments with irregular amounts, or we can discount multiple streams of payments with irregular amounts. Now, if you look at this one strictly, if you were to even go a step further, if you take your FV over 1 plus R to the power 1, for example, you could actually rewrite it as FV times 1 over 1 plus R to the power 1. And this is what we normally refer to as the discounting factor. We refer to this as the discounting factor. So that's it, as you separate it, so this becomes discounting factor. Now, if we were to go the next step, someone says, okay, what if the amounts were constant? If the amounts were constant and you still applied this formula of picking each one of them and adding on, you should arrive at the same construct. But then sometimes, what is the point of duplicating something when you can find what would appear to be a simple way around it? So for example, we have a timeline. If we are here right now, and then we have promised ourselves that for the next 5 years, we are going to be depositing 10,000 every year into an account, and we want to know how much it will accrue to or be worth. It means that, and remember, in ordinary parlance, payments are always done in arrears. You go to work for January and you're paid at the end of January for the work that you did for the whole of January. It is in very few and rare cases that we pay you before you start the work. And so the same construct holds that whenever we are deriving formulas, we work with the ordinary. And then once we have settled on the ordinary, because we can make some assumptions, then we tweak that to deal with the extraordinary. And so because payments are typically after the fact or post the issue, so January, you get paid at the end of January. February, you get paid at the end of February. We work with a construct that payments usually occur at the end of the period. So you see that payments will occur at the end of period 1. Payments will occur at the end of period 2. So when you look at this, you realize that this is payment at the end of period 1. But that same end of period 1 is intrinsically beginning of period 2. And this is end of period 2, but intrinsically beginning of period 3. And this is end of period. 3 is intrinsically period 4 beginning, and it goes on and on. So now let's just assume that we actually have 10,000 every year for the next 5 years. And the payment is ordinarily in arrears, that, okay, I'm going to give you 5 payments, 5 annual payments for the job, maybe a consulting contract you're doing for me, or a retainer where I get to offer you strategic advice to grow your business, for example. So now, if this is the case, if I were to look at future value, and I want to, okay, so if I don't touch any of these monies and I reinvest and reinvest, what would it look like when the contract ends at the end of the 5th year? Ordinarily, then it will look like, okay, take payment 1. Now, because it's the same payment, we can actually go by the, say, PV1, and we're going to invest it for 1 plus R. And then because it's for, so from here to 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it means that we're going to have the first one for 4. And then we are going to have PV, which is the same 10,000, 1 plus R to the power 3. Then we're going to have PV 1 plus R to the power 2 plus PV 1 plus R to the power 1 plus the last PV 1 plus R to the power 0. So let me just reframe that properly here, so that the total value we are looking at, total future value, is actually PV 1 plus R to the power 4 plus PV 1 plus R to the power 3 plus PV 1 plus R to the power 2 plus PV 1 plus R to the power 1. And then let me clean up this portion so you can see it well. Then we're going to have plus PV 1 plus R to the power 0. So you can see that we actually have 5 payments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The amounts are identical. So assuming we now can say we reflect it as a constant payment. In that regard, we can say now it's equal to C 1 plus R to the power 4 plus C 1 plus R to the power 3 plus C, because a constant payment, 1 plus R to the power 2 plus C 1 plus R to the power 1, and then plus C 1 plus R to the power 0. And we know that anything to the power 0 is as good as 1. So that's what we'll have. So you can see that this is identical, that is identical, that's it. So we go through an iteration, and that realizes, okay, we can actually do some kind of simplification. So now, because the amount is constant in amount, also it's constant in volume and constant in interval, but ends at a certain point, we normally like to call it an annuity. So that's a level stream of cash flows with a finite duration. So we have an annuity, constant in terms of the amount, constant in terms of the timing interval, and then it ends. So we call that an annuity. Now, if that is the case, we can actually simplify and say, okay, so the future value of this annuity here can be given, when we simplify it, then we can say, okay, if we simplify, we can have C, and then we open some brackets, some geometric progression goes in, which I won't focus on for here. We can say this is 1 plus R to the power n minus 1, because remember that, and then we have divided by R. And this becomes a simplified formula on condition that 1, the amounts for the payments are equal, and 2, the interval is the same and unbroken. So for example, if I get payments of 10,000 on 1, but I don't get on 2, but I get on 3, 4, and 5. The fact that this breaks, I cannot treat all of that as an annuity. I may be able to deal with this as an annuity, but even then there are adjustments to make. So immediately it breaks, your safest bet will be to deal with them as unequal, so meaning that they are irregular amounts. So you go to the standard formula where you pick each one of them, and if it's future value, you pick first payment, and then to the power n minus 1, and then because they are payments in arrears, and then you go on till the last one. So that's for the typical future value of annuity formula. Now, when you pick the same construct, then it means it stands to reason that you should be able to also derive a formula for present value of annuity. Because yes, if the payments, so here, this is where we are looking at what the value will be at the end of period 5. What if we know the payments, but we want to see, so what is it really worth in terms of today's purchasing power? So in that case, we want to rather discount it to times 0. This is what is going to happen. It means that if we take the timeline, and so if you can see, I keep on drawing the timeline. So this is something you have to try to master over time so that it makes your work much easier. Once you master it, you may choose not to draw it when you have to deal with issues, but it makes life very simple. So here, if we have payments that we want to determine present value for, and they are constant, meaning that we receive 10K as usual, 10K, 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 and 10K. We want to find out, okay, so what's really the present value? What is its purchasing value or power in terms of today, given the interest rates on the market? Remember that interest rates usually would reflect some level of inflation, etc. So if we take that, what it means is that when we take first payment, we'll discount it 1 period backwards. Second payment, we'll get 2. Third payment, we'll get 3. So what is going to happen is, if we were to go by the route, we're going to take our first future value, and then we are going to discount 1 plus r to the power 1. Then we are going to take the second future value, and then we have to discount that 2 steps backwards to be able to take us to 0.0, which is today. Then we go on to payment 3, and then we discount, and then we have that. Then we do payment 4, and then we have that. Then we have payment 5, and then we have that as well. You can see clearly from here, if you look at the frame, you can see that 10,000 for the first one is the same in terms of value. And so if this is the case, then it only stands to reason that if I want the total present value, so the summed PV, total PV, which is the discounting of the individual, I can easily say that 10,000 is identical across, so I can still go and say, okay, then it's as good as that plus C. And because it's the same amount, whether you label it or not, the amount is the same. And so we do to the power 2 plus C 1 to the power 3 plus C over 1 plus R to the power 4 plus C over 1 plus R to the power 5. Now, you look at it from this angle, and then clearly you can see that apart from the exponents changing from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and 5, all the other parameters are literally the same. So of course, we also take it through some mathematical iterations, geometric progression in this manner, simplify this, and then as you like to put it, as if you've gone through a chemical reaction, you now derive the present value of an annuity. Remember, constant payment, constant timing, finite duration. it means present, it becomes an annuity. So present value of an annuity is given as C. Now you can see that I mentioned earlier that this can be written as C times 1 over. So what you see happening is this. We're going to have 1 minus 1 over 1 plus R to the power N, all divided by R, brackets closed. If you look at it critically, it actually seems to reflect almost a mirror image of the future. In fact, you can, for those who are very good with their maths, they could actually write it and say, you could write it as 1 minus 1 plus R to the power negative N over R. If you look at it critically, you see that this is almost like a mirror image of saying, if you put a mirror here, what, or let me put it this way, I think I'm better off putting it this way so that you can see the similarity. What you find happening is that if I were to put a mirror image here and do C into brackets, so bigger brackets, 1 plus R to the power N minus 1 all over R, brackets closed, you can see that this is literally a mirror image. So C is here. This is the flip or the inverse of that, and then the values are literally the same. So this is just to show you the fact that one is here in time present and one is in the future. And so depending on what it is that you're working out, you could easily solve for that. So where here we have the future, the present value of annuity formula. And so that's how it becomes the case. So present value of annuity. So when we talk of the annuity, we are talking about the fact that we have constant payments in terms of the amount, constant intervals. Like I mentioned, once the interval is broken, you need to be careful how you apply that. So with this formula now, then someone will say, okay, so what if the payment was made in advance, like we sometimes pay for rent? You pay before you enjoy. You pay before you enjoy. So when that happens, we say that the payment is in advance. And so you notice something clearly here, that when payment is in advance and it's for a 5-year, let's say, rental agreement, and you are the one receiving the payment, it means that you receive the first payment. And then I mentioned that year 2 is actually, sorry, so this is, let me clean it well so that you get before I. So this is period 1, but it's also the beginning of year 2. So that becomes payment for year 2. End of period 2 is actually beginning of period 3. So you can receive the amount. Then you have end of period 3, year 3 being the beginning of year 4. And then end of year 4 would actually be also the beginning of year 5. So you can see that you have your 5 payments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they are not following the ordinary sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what do? Now, I remember saying that we normally derive formulas for the ordinary situation, and then we adjust to reflect the situation of the extraordinary. So this becomes an extraordinary situation. So remember that when we were dealing with the ordinary, what we said was that we have, for example, if it's future value, we would have said C into brackets 1 plus R to the power N minus 1 all over R, brackets closed. And so what really then happens is this is the ordinary future value of annuity. But if we look at it critically, something would happen here. For the same set of payments, if we are interested in doing our evaluation on 0.5, as the case would be, okay, this 5th year payment, and we are the one receiving the rent, so we keep on investing. So by the time the guy is moving out on 31st December of year 5, we want to know how much accrued to us. This is what is going to happen. Now, interestingly, for this payment, you're going to get 10,000 into 1 plus R. But remember, now you're going to get 5 periods. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then you do the first one, you get 5. Plus 10,000. So in this case, just remember this is 10K. Okay, let me just put the K. Into 1 plus R to the power 4. Then plus 10K into 1 plus R to the power 3. And it goes on. And then the last payment, so let me just add on 10K into 1 plus R to the power 2 plus the last 10K into 1 plus R to the power 1. So what you realize happening is that for the payment in advance, 5 payments, and the first payment actually earns interest for 5 years until the last one, compared to the arrears where the first payment actually starts on 4, and you have 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. So 5 payments, but 1 does not earn. In the case of payment in advance, you have 1 earning for 5 periods, 4 periods, 3 periods, 2 periods, 1, all 5 payments. So then the question is, how do we then derive the payment in advance, that's the annuity due, from the ordinary payment? Now, if you look at this clearly, what do you think is the case? If we have this, and remember something I need to indicate. Now, when it comes to the formula work for this N, please, whenever you are using this formula, do not make the mistake that because we started with for example, for the future value, you could see from here that we started utilizing 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Please do not make the mistake of putting 4 in the formula for the future value of annuity. If you do that, it actually will adjust the formula to reflect 4 payments, meaning it will pick 3, 2, 1, and 0. If you put 5, the formula already will adjust and say that hey, there are 5 payments, but because there are payments in arrears, and that's how the formula is constructed, it will pick it as 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. And so when you're utilizing the lump sum, which is the irregular kind, then you will do the counting and you will start from 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, and then the 0. When you're using the formula for annuity because it fulfills the annuity description, put in the fact that it is a 5 payment annuity. And once the formula is the ordinary annuity formula, it would adjust and say that, okay, this is an ordinary annuity formula. So the formula adjusts to reflect 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. In this case, therefore, if we put 5 here, it's literally picking 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. If we put 4 here, it starts by adjusting for only 4 payments, with the first one taking on a 3, a 2, a 1, and a 0. So you've got to be very careful. So once you have adjusted for that, now you can see from here, if they are identical, then it means that I am going to have something like C into 1 plus R to the power 5, plus C into 1 plus R to the power 4, plus C into 1 plus R to the power 3, plus C into 1 plus R to the power 2, plus the last C into 1 plus R to the power 1. Now, once I'm making for this case, somebody will say, this is So here, this is the typical ordinary annuity, which accounts for 5 as 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Here I have payment in advance, and my formula is showing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if this formula, so let me just rewrite it. If this formula gave rise to that, so let's see, 1 plus r to the power 3 plus c 1 plus r to the power 2 plus c 1 plus r to the power 1. And we are saying, so this is the payment in advance. Yes, the payment in arrears for a 5-year payment also will look like this. C 1 plus r to the power 4 plus c 1 plus r to the power 3 plus c 1 plus r to the power 2 plus c 1 plus r to the power 1 plus c 1 plus r to the power 0, all accounting for 5 payments. The main difference is this. So someone will say, this is what was used to construct the ordinary annuity formula in arrears. How do we convert this ordinary setting into the extraordinary setting? What you can see is that all we need to do is to multiply through by a 1 plus r, and suddenly a c into 1 plus r to the power 4 plus c into 1 plus r to the power 3 plus c into 1 plus r to the power 2 plus c into 1 plus r to the power 1 plus c into brackets 1 plus r to the power 0. If we were to put all of that in here, and then we multiply by a 1 plus r, once we open the brackets, what you notice happening is that c into brackets 1 plus r to the power 4 multiplied by 1 plus r to the power 5, 1 plus r, would suddenly make us c into brackets 1 plus r to the power 5. And then the 1 to the power 3 will convert to a 1 to the power 4. And the 1 to the power 2 will convert to a 3. And 1 to the power 1 will become a 2. And the 1 to the power 0 will literally also convert to a 1 to the power 1. So what it really means is that by revising what is in the brackets with a 1 plus r, we actually converted from the ordinary annuity formula to the extraordinary annuity due, that's payment in advance. And so if we are to go by that construct, it means that if what is in the brackets, gave rise to this, I think I was able to move my writing. I want to show the entire, okay, so here, okay, that allows me to. So if, for example, I put everything together, what it means is that if in the formula work in here gave rise to what I needed in terms of c into brackets 1 plus r to the power n minus 1 all over r here, it means that if I adjust 1 plus r here, it means I move this formula from the ordinary formula that started from 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 to now addressing the requirement of a formula that deals with 54321. And so this becomes future value of annuity due. And so that's how it is. The same principle therefore holds that when we have present value situations where we were able to derive the present value as our C over 1 plus R, let's say if it's 5, so we had 1 plus C over 1 plus R to the power 2 plus C over 1 plus R to the power 3 plus C over 1 plus R to the power 4 plus C over 1 plus R to the power 5. Because this is where we are assuming that if this is 5, this is 4, this is 3, this is 2, this is 1, and this is 0.0. If we are discounting, we discounted this one, we'll discount this one twice, we'll discount this one 3. Now, what if the payments are in advance, meaning that they're early payments, payment in advance, meaning that instead of rolling back, one of the payments is already on 0.0. So for a 5-year payment, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. What it means is that whatever is on 0.0 is already on 0.0. So even if we're going to work on the premise, if we wanted to discount, it would have been C over 1 plus R to the power 0 plus, then we'll have the first one, the second one rather now being 1, and then the third one being 2. And so the last one would actually be C over 1 plus R to the power what? 4. So somebody will say, it is this ordinary formula or this original where payment is in arrears, and so we have first one coming this way, that gave rise to the present value of annuity formula, which is typically given as C into brackets 1 minus 1 over 1 plus R to the power n all over R, brackets closed. Now, if this is how it was derived, now one of the payments, and remember this one addresses this issue of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is how this one also deals with it. So then the problem is, if you use this formula to deal with a 0, 1, 2, no, it won't work, because if you put 5 years, a 5-year payment, all right, okay, Moses, I'll be with you shortly. If you put the 5 here, it means it will, for discounted, it will count at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, because that's how the formula was derived. But here, one of these payments to the power 0 is literally 1, meaning that there's no discounting. So literally, what you have happening is that you have a C plus a 4 payments that undergoes discounting. So in that case, you would have done n minus 1, meaning that there are 5 payments, one of them has not been discounted, and so you could write it as this 1 minus 1 over 1 plus R to the power n minus 1 all over R. Usually when we write it this way, it's fine, except that when students are doing the computation, sometimes they add the 2 C's after the bracket, forgetting that once one of them is attached to the brackets, the mathematical interpretation is different. So what sometimes we like to do is to just move the C to this other side. That's one approach. So you're going to end up and say 4 of the payments will undergo discount, as you may say, so n payments, but n minus 1 will be discounted because they fall into the ordinary stream of things. So we have 1 minus 1 over 1 plus R to the power n minus 1 all over R. Then you add the single payment that was not discounted in a C form. Another way is to say that, if you look at this way, and we have only 4 of them being discounted because you have 4, 3, and 0, then what do? We can always put this here, multiply by 1 plus R, and suddenly, in terms of principals indices, this will move to 4. This will move to 3 because after we multiply through, it actually will come to 3, then 2, then 1, and then 0, which then begins to mimic the payments in advance. And so what you can then do is that if we have the ordinary, so instead of utilizing this, we can say that to convert the present value of annuity formula, which is C into brackets 1 minus 1 over 1 plus R to the power N all over R. To convert it to due, we start with the same formula, minus 1 over 1 plus R to the power N all over R. Then we adjust for the 1 plus R. And that immediately does the conversion for us to become present value of annuity due. And so that's, strictly speaking, these are the basic principles of time value of money that you need to play around with constantly and more. I think there was a hand up. Have you typed in the chat box so I can read and then address the issue? I think I saw a hand up, so if you can, yeah, so Moses, if you could type in your question, I will address that. So whilst he's typing in the question, so we go on to look at one last construct before we end the class. So all throughout, we have assumed that interest is compounded once a year or once a period. Typically, interest rates are computed per annum. So we're assuming that interest is compounded once a year. Now, if that be the case, then of course, there's nothing to worry. But more often than not, even for T-bills, for example, typically when you want to invest in T-bills, sometimes you go through the iteration of invest for 91 days, which is Q1, then another 91 days to end Q2, another 91 days to end Q3, and another 91 days to end Q4. And so whilst you may have T-bill 91 day, for example, being quoted at 29%, that 29% is per annum. And so if it is per annum, then somebody will say, how do we deal with that? So 91 days means that it's a quarterly framework. So first, we're going to take the 29, which is quoted per annum, divided by 4 to give us approximate rates that is computed on quarterly basis when we hold on to the T-bill. And so if we take 29%, which is approximately 0.29, and we divide it by 4, that gives us, to a large extent, somewhere in the region of 7.25%, which we normally will write as 0.0725. Now, if we are to go by that construct, then something then begins to happen. So let's say that we have some money put in T-bills. Now, whilst T-bills is quoting 29%, we realize that we can earn approximately 7.25%. So that's just 29 divided by 4, 7.25% per quarter or per 91 days. So let's see what happens. So Q1, which is January to end of March, if we had 10,000 cedis, for example, we will invest it for one period and earn 7.25% for one period, and that will take us to the region of somewhere in the region of about 10,725. So let's see. So we're going to have about 10,725 CDs. Then if we do not take 725 out, but we roll everything ending Q2, it means that we would have invested 10,725, also earning 7.25%. And at the end of the period, we would have something in the region of, we'll have something in the region of 11,502.5625. So 11,502.5625. Then we go a step further. Q3 ending, so that'll be ending September. We would roll our entire 11,502 and we'll earn 7%, 7.25% on that. And let's see what that gives us. And so let's see, approximately 1.0725. That takes us somewhere into the region of 12,336.4982. Okay, then ending December Q4, having invested our 12,336.4982 and earning 7.25%, we are going to end up with a value of approximately 132, so that's 13,000. So we're going to have 13,230 CDs, 0.89 pesos thereabout with some extra. So you look at it critically, and of course, if you're somebody who is quite hands-on with your mathematics, you could realize immediately that if we had invested 10,000 at 29% upfront, 10,000 at 29% should have given us no more than 12,900. Yet at this point, we are speaking to the issue of a 13,230 CD, 89%. Of course, if you're dealing in billions, you know what that means, an extra billion to play around with. So the question then is, how does a 29% return yield not rather a 12,900, but a 13,000, which effectively comes down to the fact that if I were to take my future value, subtract my initial investment, and scale it by my initial investment, it means that I am arriving at my interest, and if I multiply by 100, it means I can arrive at my interest percentage. So we can even go a step further and say, you know something, how did we come by our future value? So we can decide and say, okay, you know, it is FV over PV minus PV okay. So I have FV over, okay, so let me deal with it. So I have my FV minus my PV divided by my PV, which is my original investment. So then, and then I can multiply by 100. So that gives me my rate. So let's say for now, I'm ignoring my multiplication. What it means is that for my interest, I can actually say FV divided by PV minus PV divided by PV. That literally means that and that I can have FV over PV minus 1. That's my interest rate. So that's that. But remember, how did we come by this FV, which is a multiplicity of the exchange, the scenario we printed with the T-bills? We actually got that by doing 4 iterations. So we actually had our initial 10,000, which is our PV. Then remember, we had divided our 29 by 4. So what it actually meant was that we had 1 plus a quarterized rate into another quarterized rate into another quarterized rate into a last quarterized rate. So we had 4 quarters to give us the future value, and then we can scale it by our PV again minus 1, meaning that that's when we can cancel these two. And so we literally have 1 plus R to the power 4. But remember, if we leave this R like this, it means we are talking annual rate. So instead, this R here will be divided by 4. And so this here becomes typically what, in this case, per the T-bill rate, will give us the annual effective rate. Now, if we are dealing first, therefore, with just annual, it means that all things being equal, we have, so here, this is 1 year in 4 quarters. So what it means is that we are going to say, if it's 1 year, what you're seeing, therefore, should be, and if it's multiple years, we're going to rather do 1 plus R over F, which is the frequency that you want to be computing interest, N, which is the number of years you have, times your F. Now, in this case, minus 1 if you're looking for the interest. But if it's 1 year, what it means is that N is 1, and so it becomes literally negligible. We can ignore. So effective annual rate of interest is captured by the formula 1 plus R over F to the power F minus 1, knowing where your F and the minus 1s were coming from. So that's what we saw, annual. What it then means is that if you had payments for any investment and you were told that compounding was more than once a year, it means you don't just write, for example, future value is equal to PV 1 plus R to the power N, because then you are assuming that interest is computed just once a period. So if interest is computed in multiple periods, then what you do is that you still have your maybe one-time PV, but you will adjust the rate to reflect the periodic computation rates, and then you have your number of years but multiplied by the frequency. And so this becomes your adjusted future value formula. What it really tells you is that if, for example, you have an investment that pays interest rates on semi-annual basis, it means that you earn a semi-annual rate. And if it's a 10-year investment, it means you earn a semi-annual rate for 20 years, because your 10 years times a frequency of twice in a year means that you'll be earning interest 20 times in the 10 years, because the interest is computed every 6 months. If it happens to be a quarterly investment, but still for 10 years, it means that you earn interest every quarter for 10 years. That gives you 40 periods. And so remember that there should always be a synchronicity between the rate and then the exponent. So if your rate is reflecting annual rates, then your exponent should be counted in years. If your rate is reflecting quarterly rates, then your exponent should reflect the number of quarters for which you are investing or receiving. If it's semi-annual, it should reflect accordingly. So these are some basic constructs that you now play around with as you move within the space of what? time value of money. So these are some of the issues that we would want to bring to. I think I'll put an end to the session here, and then I will take questions.